Ruby and Sapphire, non-linear, you gotta pay attention or you'll get stuck. Black and White 2, same if not a bit easier, but you still gotta pay attention or you'll get stuck. X and Y, button mash A, and you'll eventually beat the game. That is the trend that Game Freak have put this franchise into, and we've noticed it for years. So what I'm gonna do is put these two into their own category, the DS era and the 3DS era of Pokemon, and the Switch era. We have X and Y, the easiest of the 3DS era, in my opinion. Why? The experience share. That's literally the only reason why it's the easiest game in the 3DS era and Switch era Pokemon. Next, I'd have to rank Sword and Shield, because it's really the same thing as X and Y. You just spam A and the experience share will carry you to victory. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl continues a trend of being able to play the game and beat it without any worries at all. And then Scarlet and Violet, because of its open world aspect. I think that's harder because you choose where to go, and if you're not careful, you can end up in the wrong places in the game and you can kind of screw yourself over with that. So already, that era of Pokemon has the easiest line of Pokemon games. X and Y, the easiest, Sword and Shield, BDSP, Scarlet and Violet. I missed one, but we'll get back to it. And now, the DS era of the Pokemon games, which is the hardest by far. Starting off with the easiest DS game, which I think is Black and White and Black and White 2. Now, hear me out. These things depend on the method of grinding. So the easier the game is, generally depends on how easy it is to grind. Black and White did a very good thing by adding the mechanic of Autonos, granting way more experience than a regular Pokemon. I think it was a quality of life aspect that they kind of had to implement, because in the past games, grinding was a bit tedious. So when they added this method with the shaking grass being an Autono or an Emolga, but I think it was like 70-30 for an Autono and 30 for an Emolga. When they added that, that made the game feel a lot more playable, because if they didn't, grinding, like I said, would be a lot more tedious. It makes the game easier, but not to the sense that it's so broken that after every fight you gain that amount of experience. The longer you grinded for the Autonos, over time, the slower the experience gains would have been. So it wasn't broken. They made it proper to where the longer you did it, the more balanced it became, and that made it even. Battles in Black and White 2 weren't the hardest at all. Think about all the gym leaders. I would say the hardest gym leader in Unova is probably Elisa, because her team kind of covers most of your team. Well, not most of it, but at least the starters. Elisa's Emolga covers all of the starter Pokemon. It has Aerial Ace for Pignite and Servine, and it's electric, so Dewott isn't gonna do much. After that, the gym leaders kind of became, a bit more moderate. The Elite Four are tough. They are pretty tough. But like I said, if you're smart enough to get your Pokemon up to the right levels, they can handle it. If you don't grind for it, you are going to get smoked. And the Iris battle, that's a pretty tough battle, but it's all dragon types, plus an Archeops, I think, and an Aggron. Normally, if you chose Samurott, you can cover that with its ice moves or its fighting moves. Iris is still on the easier side of a champion battle because of her typing. You know what to expect. And like I said, if you abuse the Autono strategy, then your levels are going to be fine and you wouldn't have any problem. Fire Red and Leaf Green come into this next ranking right above Black and White. They are a bit harder because you can't grind as well as Black and White 2. And from here on out, it goes from Gen 1 to Gen 4. Grinding is non-existent. It's not very good. You can do it, but you're gonna spend at least an hour trying to get, your level 50 Arcanine to level 52. It's ridiculous. And it's hard because all the Pokemon in the wild are not high level enough for you to grind your very strong Pokemon. It's very annoying. And then you get to the point where you have to fight, obviously, the Elite Four and Champion. Those battles are actually pretty tough because of the fact that your Pokemon aren't gonna be on par with them. If not, they're gonna be underleveled, and then you get frustrated into having to grind, but you don't want to waste time. You have a short attention span and you want to go in straight, and then you get destroyed. It was a very tough sequence for players because of that, that problem. Heart Gold, Soul Silver are a bit tougher than Fire and Leaf Green because, well, for one, the post game is very tough. But if we, exclude the post game, it's gonna be at this position. If we add the post game, Heart Gold, Soul Silver is probably the hardest game alongside number 1. The jump in levels from the last gym in Kanto to Red, it makes no sense. We get it, Red's supposed to be, the greatest trainer of all time, but the game is still difficult because of that battle. Some gym leaders in Heart Gold, Soul Silver are very, very tough. Whitney, her mill tank causes problems, a ton of problems. The starter choices also affect your difficulty. If you chose Chikorita, you're probably not gonna beat this game at all because the first 2 gyms are against you, and Whitney is already a problem in itself, even if you chose Cyndaquil. And then the ghost type gym for a grass type starter, no thank you. And then there's ice as well. Chikorita is just death in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Claire's fight is very tough. Important dragon type trainers are very tough, especially when there's no fairy types in the game. It can crank the difficulty up by a lot. And then Lance himself with his 3 Dragon Ice and 4 full restores. In general, it's quite hard to rank which game is harder than which because they all have different factors that prove why they're very hard. But anyway, I have to put Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, specifically Emerald though, because Emerald cranks that difficulty up by a lot. But just like in general, what I've been saying before, the Elite Four and Champion, from Gen 1 to Gen 5, the Elite Four to Champion, they're all difficult battles. That's why I ranked the later games first, because X and Y's Elite Four is a joke, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl is a joke, and that's really it. Sword and Shield weren't that difficult. They weren't. So this current DS ranking, there's gonna be some mistakes in there because it's very hard to rank the games because they were so well done in difficulty. But Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald were number 2 for me, and then the hardest game, I think, is Platinum. Diamond and Pearl were hard by themselves, but Platinum elevated it because the important battles, they were no joke. Cyrus in the Distortion World, the Giratina battle itself was very tough. That thing was very hard to catch, very annoying. And then Cynthia, we all know her as the, the lock killer for some people, even though it's at the end of the game, but Cynthia is the hardest champion battle in Pokemon. I think, I might be wrong. And then if we head back to the 3DS era, like I mentioned, the hardest 3DS game is definitely Yusum. Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, specifically because of that last battle with Ultra Necrozma. That is the hardest battle in Pokemon, period, I believe. And I think that's the only Pokemon in a mainline series game to have boosted stats before you get into the battle. The only legendary Pokemon, because all the trial Pokemon have their, their auras and stuff like that. But Ultra Necrozma getting all those boosted stats make it ridiculously difficult, and it's unique, but that cranks the difficulty of that Pokemon game up by a crap ton. And you might say, oh well, you can't just base it off of one battle, but no, you very well can, because that it's a part of the game, it's a part of the series, so you can't not include that. So my top 2 hardest games are Platinum for the DS and Yusum for the 3DS. Switch, you can't rank them because they're all so easy. But let me know what you guys think. Peace.
Sunshine when it's raining, breathe out and he takes it. Oh no, when you taste it, poisonous, all you wanna do is destroy us, and it feels so good when you